Alright guys, so these are going to be the flip notes for World War I. This will cover the sort of the background, the causes, the major leaders, and the major events of World War I. So, as always, remember that you are not just listening to the video for information, but you are also jotting notes down on your paper, filling in any of your blanks, adding extra information, and also if you're watching this through Edpuzzle, it's going to pause you periodically to answer specific questions, and you get grades both for the paper version and the electronic submission of that. So don't forget to be doing all those things. So World War I, which takes place between 1914 and 1918. It's caused by a lot of things, not the least of which is the competition between nations in Europe. So you're thinking here the big countries in Europe: France, Great Britain, Germany, Austria-Hungary, which is a big empire south of Germany, as they are vying for resources in the Industrial Revolution. They're expanding their economies, and also a failure of diplomacy, which we'll talk about a little bit on the next slide. But this diplomacy is when you're talking about trying to work out your problems. It's when countries work together to negotiate in order to keep bad things from happening. It's going to change life in Europe and in the United States. It's going to destroy the economies of Europe, and then it's going to be followed by the Great Depression, which is obviously much worse for the economies of Europe. And it's also going to, it says plant the seed, it's going to cause World War II. The way that we handle the Treaty of Versailles and the way that we handle Germany basically sets the entire world up for another major conflict. Take a look at these pictures really quickly, just so we can talk about a few things that are going on. Let's see if I can bring this to the front. Well, you have to ignore the arrow. You can see that one of the powerful things that we have in World War I are tanks, and the introduction of tanks into warfare. So those are obviously going to be much more effective than what we were doing previously, which was using horses and cavalry and infantrymen. You also have the beginnings of trench warfare, which is literally fighting from within a trench, right? They dug these big, deep ditches, and you lived within this trench, and it was disgusting, and it was outside, and it was in the elements, and so in the winter it's freezing, and you're getting snowed on, and in the summertime it's hot, but it's also still muddy, and there's disease, and one of the things we're also going to use is chemical warfare, right? You can see this picture where they've got gas masks, and even tried to outfit one of those on the is that a donkey or a mule, trying to keep him safe, though it's probably not going to be all that effective for him. And the mustard gas and that sort of thing will settle down into the trenches, and it is terrible. Some statistics argue that more people died of the things that happened to them within the trench than actually died from being shot by enemy fire. Also, I think you can probably hear my dog wandering around in the background, so sorry about that. He's just checking out what's going on. So there are a series of causes that we can talk about, but the phrase is maniacs, M-A-N-I-A-C-S, that World War I is caused by maniacs. So the first M, or the M, is militarism. It's that countries in Europe, in Asia, are going to build up their militaries. They're going to be stockpiling weapons. They're going to be training forces. They're going to be building tanks and that sort of thing, all in preparation for in case they were headed to war. And when you have this ready supply of munitions and armaments and that sort of thing, you are then more sort of willing to go into war because you've got the numbers and you've got the preparation that's there. The next one is alliances. So the first A is alliances. An alliance is an agreement between countries. It's like a friendship between countries where if one person gets attacked, then their friends will help, right? So if someone were to attack, say, France, then the British and the Russians are going to fight alongside France because they're a part of something called the Triple Entente. The Triple Entente is going to later be known as the Allies as the war progresses and as different countries join. This is the side that the United States is going to join ultimately. And on the other side is the Triple Alliance, which is the Germans and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, as well as the Ottomans. So we can add them, right? The Ottomans. I'm not going to spell that all out, but right, the Ottomans. And they're also going to change names. They're going to become the Central Powers. So on the map that we do for this unit, we refer to them as the Central Powers because they're in the center of Europe. All right. The N is nationalism. We've talked about nationalism several times throughout World II. Nationalism is pride in your country. It leads people to fight within their country. It leads people to push for their country. We talked about nationalism when we talked about the revolutions of North and South America and the French Revolution, where people were fighting for independence, people were fighting for their country, fighting for democracy. We also talked about it. We talked about imperialism and how people were willing to colonize into Africa in order to make Great Britain or France or Germany or whichever country bigger and stronger with their resources. This is the same concept, only you're going to look at it more in the vein of sending people off to war. One of the things that we don't see today is people joining the military and being like, I'm not saying we're not celebrating that because we are very proud of those people, but we're not having parades as they head off to war. We're certainly not having parades when they return. Entire towns would shut down in order to welcome troops back and that sort of thing. All of that national pride is going to come into play and lead to, it sort of goes hand in hand. Nationalism goes hand in hand with militarism. Well, I think I just took that off the screen, sorry. Where, like, people are so proud of their country that when their country was attacked, they joined up and they built the military up even further. The next one, the I, is imperialism. So that's something we've been talking about alongside with the Industrial Revolution. This is where it's the same thing as colonization, right? It's where the British, the Germans, the French, the Italians, everybody was taking over places in Africa in particular, including, remember, we talked about how they encompass all of Africa with the exception of Ethiopia and Liberia, I think is the country. And so that entire continent is taken over, and when they're competing for colonies and competing for resources, that causes tense diplomatic relations within Europe itself. You know, if there's a border dispute between Germany and France in Africa, that's also going to lead to tension, you know, in Europe between the Germans and the French. We're going to skip this A for just a minute. I'm going to talk about it in just a second. I'm going to do the C and the S, and I'll go back to the A. So the C is there are conflicts in the Balkan Peninsula. So the Balkan Peninsula is Greece and the land just north of Greece. All that is actually going to tie into this same thing as letter A, where you've got several different groups that are living under a series of different rulers, not the least of which is the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the nationalism tie is going to lead to some disputes between Russia and Austro-Hungary over who should control those lands. It was just also going to lead to some diplomatic failures where, like, they can't negotiate, they can't work things out. The people in those regions, some of them want to be independent, some of them want to be associated with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, some of them want to be associated with the Russian Empire. And regardless, when we're having peace talks, nothing's working. The alliances are sometimes in secret and sometimes very public, but regardless, they're going to throw you into wars and conflicts and disagreements with countries purely on who your friends are. Which leads me back to letter A, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. So Archduke Ferdinand is an heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, so he's going to be the king one day of Austria-Hungary. And he is traveling through Sarajevo, which is a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire where the Serbians live, where Serbia is. And the problem in that region is that the Serbians are more ethnically Russian. They're more like Russian people. They're Slavic, as opposed to the Austro-Hungarians, who are more German. And so their cultures are different, their languages are different, their customs are different. And there's this big movement, according to Serbian nationalism, right? So it's all tying together here, Serbian nationalism, for people to push for independence and to join with Russia rather than be part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So Ferdinand and his wife are traveling through Sarajevo in a, like, hey, parades and parties, and it's the prince, right? And they're being welcomed into the city that they're visiting. And there's a parade, and there's a movement. There's a Serbian nationalist group called the Black Hand, which are basically trying to inspire a Serbian revolution. So they create this plot to assassinate Archduke Ferdinand. And so one of the things that happens is that they decide to throw a grenade into the car, because this is 1914, right? So it's an open air, like, convertible without the top on it car. And so they launch this grenade, and like the key to launching a grenade is like pull pin, throw at target, right? Only they miss. They don't actually like hit the car. That's the point. Was it supposed to go in the car? It doesn't work. So the driver like speeds off, obviously, and like Archduke Ferdinand and his wife are like super safe, and they're like, woohoo, we're great. And so he's like driving around, and the driver gets a little confused, a little lost. But ultimately they get sort of calmed down and turned around, and the wife is like super distraught. She's like, these people that were here at this parade, like, they were just coming to see us, and oh my gosh, they were some of them might have been seriously hurt when that grenade went off, and we need to go back. So they convinced the driver to turn around, because they didn't really know where they were anyway. And as they're turning around, one of the members of the Black Hand, his name is Gavrilo Princip. He's like 19 years old. He's got tuberculosis. Like, he's not living a great life, but he's a member of the Serbian nationalist group. He sees them stopped and turned around, so he just pulls out his gun and he shoots the Archduke and kills him. And so a Serbian who is Russian affiliated has attacked a Austro-Hungarian who is and killed the Austro-Hungarian like prince. And so Serbia shoots Austria-Hungary, which means that Serbia's allies, which include Russia, Britain, and France, all have to go to war against Austria-Hungary's allies, which include, say, Germany and the Ottoman Empire. So it gets very convoluted. But that's the spark. That's what starts the whole war in general. All right, you actually only have to know two key leaders. Obviously, you need to know Ferdinand because, he dies and he's the reason the war starts. But you need to know President Woodrow Wilson. He is the President of the United States. He is also ultimately going to be responsible for something called the 14 Points Plan, which is going to lay out the peace treaty for World War I, rather. And then you also need to know Kaiser Wilhelm II. He is the Kaiser, or the King of Germany. And he is alive through 1941, though he is no longer ruling by 1941 because Adolf Hitler comes to power in the 1930s. So there's only two gentlemen you have to know. And you actually only have to know 4 major events. We're going to go through them really quickly. Number 1, we've already covered the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. Number 2, the United States, you can see, gets into the war 3 years later. There are 2 things that cause that. There's the Zimmermann telegram, which was sent from Germany to Mexico, asking Mexico to attack the United States and keep the United States out of the war. In exchange, if they had won the war, Germany would have given Mexico back the land that they had lost to the United States in the Mexican-American War. So California, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, the southwestern section. It's intercepted by the Allies before it ever reaches Mexico. And so obviously Mexico does not attack the United States, and that's one of the reasons that leads us to war. The other issue is the sinking of the Lusitania, which is a passenger ship that was carrying, obviously, passengers. It's like a sister ship to the Titanic, right? It's a cruise line, but they were using it to cross the Atlantic. This is before planes, obviously. And on board are, I want to say like 1,500 people, but 180 or so of them are American citizens. And so that turned the tide of Americans wanting to fight this war, because up through 1917, Americans were like, that's not our problem, that's a European war, whatever. We also have Russia leaving the war for the Russian Revolution, which we'll talk about later. And